Block out the night when the veil thins. It begins with a whisper through the trees. A chill that is not key to winter, and yet not of summer either. Somewhere between the harvest and the frost, the world seems to hold its breath. For the Celts of ancient Europe, this was no ordinary season. It was Samhain, the night when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. To them, time did not march forward like a Roman calendar. It turned like the wheel of life itself. The end of October was the end of the old year, when the sun's strength faded and darkness reclaimed the earth. But darkness was not feared, it was respected, revered, even invited. On the high plains of Ireland and the mist-covered hills of Scotland, great fires burned. The druids, priests, healers, keepers of the sacred order stood at their summits, cloaked in white, casting sacred orbs into the flames. Below, entire tribes gathered. The people extinguished the hearth fires in their homes, only to look at them from the Druidic ways, a symbol that life itself must pass through death to be reborn. They believed that on this night, the boundary between worlds dissolved. Spirits wandered freely, some came to bless, others to deceive. Food was left at doorsteps to appease wandering souls. Masks were worn to confuse malevolent ones. The world itself became a theater of shadows, half in this life, half in the next, and there was poetry in it. For the Celts saw this not as an end, but as a turning the quiet curve in a spiral too vast for human eyes to see. Even as centuries would pass, and empires would rise and fall, this sacred night would survive, sometimes hidden beneath new names, sometimes disguised in foreign rites. But always, the essence remained, honoring the passage between life and death, light and shadow, memory and oblivion. The fire would never truly die, not in the hearts of those who still feel the whisper of the old gods when autumn's breath turns cold. But what few remember is that Samhain was not merely about ghosts. It was about time itself, about a world that moved in cycles of creation and decay, a truth that modern civilization would almost forget. And yet, as the Romans marched north, with their own gods and festivals, something extraordinary began to happen. The ancient Feast of Shadows was about to be rewritten, but to understand how, we must journey into the empire that conquered the known world and unknowingly preserved the mysteries it tried to erase. Block imposto de importação, the empire of the living and the dead Rome. The beating heart of civilization, or so it claimed, where marble temples gleamed and emperors were made into gods, death was both feared and worshipped. The Romans celebrated it not with sorrow, but with ritual precision. And as their legions marched in the Celtic lands, they carried with them two feasts that would intertwine with semi-like idea around an oak. The first was Feralia, a solemn day in February honoring the spirits of the dead. Offerings of wine, bread, and flowers were placed at tombs to soothe ancestral souls. The second, Pomona's Day, was dedicated to the goddess of fruit and harvest. Her symbol, the apple, would survive through the centuries, echoing in the Halloween games we play even now. When the empire stretched into Gaul and Britain, its administrators and priests found themselves staring into the Celtic fidelige and perhaps into something they could not fully understand. The Romans, pragmatic as ever, did what they always did when faced with an older, unyielding tradition. They absorbed it. Feralia and Pomona fused with Samhain, reshaping the ritual calendar of conquered peoples. But in that merging, something profound happened. A dialogue began, not of politics or power, but of cosmic order. For both Romans and Celts shared a truth beneath their different tongues. That the veil between worlds was real, that ancestors were not gone but present, watching, whispering. Death was merely another domain of the empire, invisible, yet ever near. Centuries later, when Christianity spread through these lands, the Church would attempt to tame this wild season of spirits. In the 7th century, Pope Boniface Intravenoso established All Saints' Day to honor the Holy Dead first and me, then moved in November Street by Pope Gregory III to coincide with Samhain. What had been the Celtic New Year became the eve of All Hallows Eve, and eventually, Halloween. Yet beneath the hymns and incense, the embers of the Druidic fire still glowed. Children still wore disguises. People still lit candles for the departed. The sacred night of turning still whispered in the corners of old Europe. History would call it a conversion, But perhaps it was something deeper, a continuity of the human soul as need to understand death, dressed in new names and new gods. The Romans might have conquered the Celts, but Samhain in its quiet way conquered them. And as the ancient world dissolved into the medieval age, that fire of remembrance would transform once more this theme into something both darker and more human than ever before. Block 3's The Shadowed Faith. The fire did not die. It merely changed its name. When Rome's empire crumbled and the church was upon its ruins, the human need to speak with the dead to honor, to remember, to reconcile did not vanish. It merely took on new vestments. The pagan bonfires became candles in cathedrals, and the offerings left for wandering spirits turned into prayers for souls in purgatory. By the 8th century, the Celtic festival of Samhain had been officially absorbed into a Christian calendar that tried to sanctify every season. November Street became All Saints' Day, a theme to celebrate those holy men and women who had reached heaven. The night before, October 31st Street remained charged with an older power, whispered of as All Hallows Eve. But beneath the hymns, the words still remembered. Peasants across Ireland, Scotland, and the rugged corners of Wales continued to light their bonfires, wearing tattered masks not to honor saints, but they tricked the spirits believed to wander in the night. The Druids were gone, yet their shadows lingered. In the monasteries, priests recorded strange tales of ghostly processions of pale figures drifting through fields, souls down to earth until they found peace. These wedding dim religions to the medieval mind. There were warnings, reminders that the veil between worlds could never be completely closed. The Church, in its wisdom or fear, gave birth to another observance, All Souls' Day, on November 2nd. It was meant to Christianize the practice of praying for the dead, yet it did something remarkable instead. It preserved the ancient dialogue between living and departed. For one brief span of nights, every year, humanity was once again permitted to look backward, to remember, to mourn, to invite and sing to its hearth. In villages, people baked soul cakes, small round loaves given to beggars and children who knocked at doors reciting prayers for the deceased. Each cake eaten was believed to release one's soul from purgatory. The act was holy but beneath the ancient. The giving of food, the lighting of lamps, the disguising of the living as spirits, all of it echoed Samhain. Halloween had not yet been named, but its soul had been reborn. And yet, something darker stirred within this rebirth, a new fear, born not of reverence but of superstition. For as Europe entered its long medieval night, death was no longer a cycle. It became a punishment, a fate to flee, and that shift would change everything. Because when humanity began to fear death more than it understood it, the Feast of Shadows became not a celebration but a warning. The block intravenoso when fear took the throne, the medieval world was ruled not by emperors of flesh, but by empires of belief. Heaven and hell, angels and demons, salvation and damnation, all were real, tangible realms that mirrored the landscape of the living. Death was not an end, nor a transformation. It was a trial. In this world of relics and relic keepers, anything tied to the old ways became suspect. The bonfire of Samhain became a fire of witchcraft. The mask became a mark of the devil, and the woman who once guided souls as a druid priestess was now called something else entirely, a witch. Yet the people could not let go. In the countryside, far in the reach of bishops and inquisitors, the old rites persisted in whispers. On the eve of All Hallows, they left offerings not only for saints, but for spirits. The flickering candle in the window, the carved turnip lantern, the small gifts of milk or bread left at crossroads all spoke of an older truth too deeply woven into human nature to erase. As plague swept across Europe and death became an intimate neighbor, the line between the natural and supernatural blurred further. People dreamed of their dead, claimed to see them in mists, and spoke of the wild haunted ghostly procession led by ancient gods now recast as devils. The world had become haunted not by spirits, but by its own memory. Still, beneath the fear, the ancient rhythm pulsed, harvest, decay, renewal. Samhain's meeting endured in every candle lit, every bell rung for the souls of the departed. The night remained sacred, though few dared call it so. Then, across the sea, the world began to change again. Empires shifted, colonies were founded, and with them, The old customs traveled like seeds on the wind. Irish and Scottish immigrants would carry their Samhain board rites across the Atlantic to a land that would one day call itself America. But before that migration, another transformation awaited one born of war, superstition, and survival. Because when the New World was born, it did not leave its shadows behind, it simply gave them a new stage. And the Feast of Shadows, once lit by Druid fire, would soon flicker again in the orange glow of a pumpkin-esque grin. Block with the journey across the sea, the ships that carried the souls of Europe to the New World brought more than tools, dreams, and prayers. They carried memories, ancient ones, older than cathedrals or kings. Among the trunks and sacks of the Irish, Scot, and English lay remnants of a ritual once whispered under the harvest moon. Samhain, now cloaked beneath Christian names, yet alive in the pulse of every autumn night. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the colonies of North America were lands of survival, not celebration. The Puritans, stern and wary of anything resembling heathen practice, condemned old festivals. They banished Halloween-esque shadows to the margins of their towns, labeling it pagan superstition. Yet traditions have a way of surviving silence. In the quiet corners of frontier settlements, as harvests ended and winter crept near, some families still lit candles for the dead. In the Appalachian valleys and the farmlands of Pennsylvania, echoes of Celtic rites mingled with the folklore of native peoples, who also honored the spirits of ancestors and the turning of the seasons. It was not until the 19th century, when famine drove waves of Irish immigrants to America, that the Feast of Shadows was reborn. These new arrivals brought their customs with them, carving lanterns from turnips to ward off spirits, playing mischief on All Hallows Eve, and telling ghost stories by Fideligate. But in the New World, the turnip became the pumpkin, larger, softer, glowing like the sun reborn. The bonfire of the Druids found its reflection in the jack-o'-lantern-esque flame. As industrial towns rose and rural villages turned to cities, Halloween evolved. The sacred night of the Celts, once ruled by the Druids and later absorbed by priests, began to shift again, this theme into a night of mischief and imagination. Children roamed the streets wearing masks not to confuse spirits, but to play the spirit-esque role themselves. Adults laughed, frightened one another, and told stories that were part legend, part memory. Yet, beneath the laughter, a strange sense of reverence lingered. The idea that on one night each year, the world still paused between harvest and winter, between life and death remained. Halloween in America became both mirror and mask, a way for the nation of immigrants to remember its men pasts without naming them. A festival of shadows where the old gods, once worshipped in forests and fields, could still walk among men disguised as folklore, as fun. And so, in this new land, the Feast of Shadows was reborn not through faith, but through play. Yet in every carved grin and flickering light, the ancient meaning endured. But its next transformation would not come from nature or spirit, it would come from the modern world itself. Blocked with the masks of the modern age by the dawn of the 20th century, the world had changed beyond recognition. Machines roared where forests once whispered. Electric light burned away the darkness that for centuries had belonged to the spirits. The ancient cycle of seasons, the heartbeat of Samhain, was drowned beneath the hum of factories. And yet, when October came, something stirred. Halloween, once a sacred observance of death and renewal, became the child of modernity. Newspapers promoted community parties. Schools held costume contests. Candy companies saw opportunity in ancient fear, and the old ritual of offering food to appease the spirits became the cheerful cry of trick or treat. But even in its commercialization, the festival retained something haunting in echo, a pulse from a forgotten age. Beneath the laughter of children and the glow of streetlights lay the same truth the Celts had once known, that death and life were not enemies, but partners in an endless dance. The masks grew elaborate. Ghosts, witches, devils, all reflections of what humanity had once revered. The jack-o'-lanterns, now mass-produced, stood on every doorstep, their toothy smiles mock it and remembering in equal measure. Yet behind the costumes and candy, Halloween became a mirror for the collective psyche as Samhain explored what civilization had spent centuries denying, the shadow within. In dressing as monsters, humans acknowledged what the Druids, the Romans, and even the priests had all understood, that within each of us lies the darkness we fear and the light we seek. Hollywood soon joined the ritual. By mid-century, films like Dracula and Frankenstein transformed ancient archetypes into icons. Horror became a language through which the modern world could reclaim its mythic roots. The pagan, the forbidden, the mystical all returned, hidden within cinema's flickering light. What began as bonfires to guide ancestral spirits had become the electric glow of television screens, each retelling the same ancient story, the struggle between mortality and meaning. Even now, as Halloween stands draped in neon orange and synthetic cobwebs, the old rhythms beat beneath its surface. The turning of seasons, the remembrance of those lost, the play between fear and joy, it all remains, wrapped in new symbols for the new age. Because deep down, humanity still craves what Samhain offers: connection to the earth, to the dead, to the mystery that lingers beyond reason. And though the masks have changed, the face beneath them remains the same, the eternal human yearning to look into the dark and find something of ourselves staring back. Block set to the denser shadows, and team every civilization must decide what to do with its dead. Some build pyramids, some carve tombs into mountains, others burn their dead and scatter the ashes to the wind. But in all of them, one truth remains constant: death defines life. The Celts knew this before any philosopher wrote it down. For them, Samhain was not about fear. It was about continuity, the invisible thread that bound the living to the dead, the present to the past. When the last harvest was gathered, they looked at their fields empty, silent, waiting for frost, and they saw not loss, but preparation. In death, the seed sleeps. In winter, life gathers strength for spring. It was a wisdom that literages forgot. The Romans turned death into ceremony. The medievals turned it into judgment. The modern world turned it into silence. We stopped speaking to our dead, and so we stopped listening to what they had to say. But on one night each year, the old rhythm returns. Halloween, or Samhain beneath another name, invites us to step out of time, to look back across the age and realize that we are not separate from the dead. We are their continuation. Every cell, every story, every dream we carry was first read by those who came before us. In that sense, Halloween is not merely about ghosts. It is about memory, collective, eternal, cyclical. When we light candles, we repeat an act older than writing. When we wear masks, we echo a ritual that once allowed humans to face their deepest fears without being consumed by them. Perhaps that is why the holiday endures. It speaks to something older than religion, deeper than culture, the human need to confront the unknown, to make peace with the dark. Because there is a paradox at the heart of existence. We live by pretending we will not die, yet we grow wise only when we accept that we will. Samhain taught that acceptance. Halloween disguises it in laughter, but both led to the same revelation, that the end is not the enemy of life, it is the guardian of meaning. And so, the veil thins not only between worlds, but within us, between who we are and who we were meant to become. Yet even this wisdom hides a greater mystery, one that transcends death itself, the question of time. For Samhain was never about the past or the future. It was about eternity hidden inside the moment between. Block or to the eternal moment, the Druids called it the time between times. A doorway, a stillness, a breath held by the universe before zilling into another cycle. This was the essence of Samhain, the moment when the sun stood low, the harvest lay bare, and the line between what was and what would be blurred into a single heartbeat. In our modern calendars, this concept seems foreign. We live in straight lines, not circles. We rush from year to year, measuring success by progress, not by rhythm. But the ancients saw time differently. To them, time turned. It spiraled, folded, repeated. Every end was a beginning wearing a mask of death. This philosophy was not more poetry, it was a way of life. To honor the dead was to honor the future, for they believed that the soul, like the sun, would always rise again after the darkness. Death, then, was not tragedy but transformation. Today, we see Halloween as a night of fear and fun. Yet behind the plastic skeletons and candy wrappers lies that same eternal principle. Every costume is a death of identity, a small ritual letting us play with transformation. Every jack-o'-lantern is the sun reborn in the night. Every gathering under autumn skies is a memory of the fires that once crowned the Celtic hills. And perhaps though few notice it, Halloween offers something modern humanity desperately needs, a moment to stop, to remember, to look inward, to recognize that, despite all our progress, we are still bound by the same cosmic rhythm: birth, death, renewal. Even science, in its grandest visions, now circles back to the same truth. Stars die to give life. Galaxies collapse to create others. In the microcosm and the macrocosm alike, destruction and creation not one process, not two. The ancients felt this intuitively. We rediscover it through telescopes and equations. In that way, the Feast of Shadows was never only about the dead, it was about the living. Yes, duty to remember that all things must pass so that others may rise. Perhaps this is why the veil still calls to use, because in our world of constant motion, Samhain Halloween reminds us of the power of stillness. For in the pause, between light and dark, between harvest and frost, we find the truth our ancestors once knew. Eternity lives in the spaces between moments. And if the veil thins each year, perhaps it is not the dead who seek us, but we who seek them, longing to remember what it means to belong to the endless circle of time. Block of the fire that never died. If one could stand upon a hill in Ireland on the night of Samhain, thousands of years ago, and then look forward through time, the sight would be astonishing. The bonfires would fade into candles, into lanterns, into electric lights. The druids' chants would soften into hymns, then laughter, then none of television screens. And yet, through every transformation, the same light endures, the flame of remembrance. This is Halloween as secret. Not horror, not mischief, but memory carried through the ages like a torch passed from hand to hand. Each civilization shaped it, but none extinguished it. For to forget death entirely would be to forget what it means to live. When we carve pumpkins today, we repeat a gesture older than our languages. The glowing fascia in the dark is both guardian and mirror, a symbol that light can inhabit even what was once feared. Children, wearing masks, step into ancient roles without knowing it, becoming spirits, gods, tricksters, wanderers between worlds. The laughter that fills the night is the echo of older songs, once sung beside the harvest fires. And so, what began as ritual became tradition, and what began as magic became memory. But at its core, it remains a conversation between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown. It is humanity speaking across the silence of eternity, saying, "We remember. We still feel you in the wind, in the fire, in the turning of the year." This is why Halloween never truly became secular. It is too primal, too human. Beneath the costumes and the candy, it still touches the oldest of all fears and the oldest of all hopes. That death is not a void, but a doorway. That perhaps the ones we have lost are not gone, merely waiting beyond the thin veil, until the fire calls again. And maybe, when we light our lanterns each year, they see the glow and remember us in turn. For the ancients believed that remembrance was a form of magic, a way to keep souls alive in the great cycle of being. And if that is true, then every Halloween night becomes a moment of resurrection, not of bodies, but of meaning. Because while the world forgets many things, it never forgets how to light the fire in the dark. And in that flame, we find not ghosts, but continuity. Block sees the circle closes, and so we return to the beginning, to the whisper through the trees, to the night when the veil thins. Thousands of years have passed since the first Samhain fires were lit, and yet the question that burned in those flames remains: what is death, if not the mirror of life? We live in an age that fears silence, that hides from endings. But Halloween endures because it dares to ask what modernity refuses to face. It allows us, for one night, to look into the abyss and find beauty there. The Celts saw in death not annihilation, but return. They saw time as a wheel, life as a spiral, existence as a song with no final note. In their wisdom, the night of Samhain was not only the death of the year, it was its seed. The world died to be born again. Every Halloween, we rehearse that mystery. We enter darkness joyfully, trusting that light will follow. We play with fear, transforming it into laughter. We walk among symbols of death, skeletons, ghosts, tombstones, not to mock them, but to make peace with them. Because deep down, we understand what our ancestors once knew, that life without death has no meaning, and memory without loss has no depth. In every culture, across every century, humanity has searched for ways to bridge the divide through myth, prayer, science, and art. Yet in the single autumn night, we achieve it effortlessly. The living and the dead share the same hour. The past breathes through the present. The eternal whispers through the ordinary. So perhaps the true power of Halloween is not in its superstition, but in its symbolism, a mirror through which we remember that every ending is also a beginning, and every shadow hides a spark of light. When the last candle burns low, and the children as laughter fades into the wind, something ancient still lingers. It hums in the air, quiet and steady, the heartbeat of a world that remembers. And if you listen closely, you might hear it through the echo of that first fire, the rustle of unseen figures passing through the veil, the murmur of ancestors who never left us, only changed their form. They whisper, "Do not fear the dark. You are a part of its rhythm. We were here before you, and you will be here after us." The fire never dies, it only waits. And then, as the night fades, the circle closes only to open again when autumn returns. Because the Feast of Shadows was never about ghosts. It was about the light we keep alive generation after generation, story after story, breath after breath, in defiance of the dark. The veil will thin again, the fires will burn again, and once more the living will walk with the dead, not in fear, but in remembrance. For the flame of Samhain still burns within us all.